Chev, we are back looking into another Dynasty rebuild, looking at another team audit. Excited to dive into this one with you. We are dealing with a complete teardown today. This team was kind of started ripping down to the studs last year, added a bunch of draft capital. Now we're going to decide what to do with that. We've already had a rookie draft. Why don't you dive into league settings and what we're dealing with, all the parameters and things like that?
We got a league size of 12, roster size is 18. This one's a shocking one. Taxi size 1. Waivers, we got Fab. Scoring is going to be PPR. Superflex league with no tight end premium. And we're starting 10. We're going 1 QB, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 2 flex, and then the Superflex spot. The current record or league finish last year was 9th place. Taxi size, though, that is a little concerning. I don't really like that too much. Maybe we can get that figured out in the next few years or so. But
yeah, I think the taxi size is worth noting, being that small. I mean, I get it. I get the, not wanting to just have unlimited taxi space and things like that. But I think having a little more, especially when you have the roster size of 18.
yeah,
And I think that's one thing where, a lot of times when I see small rosters, it's people coming over, new players from redraft had the smaller rosters. And there is an element to that of keeping the waiver wire interesting. And I think there is an element of like, who are you as a player, with having that smaller roster size? Like, are you somebody that really wants to do waiver wires every week? Or are you somebody like me who would rather just stash depth and work on building out for trades?
Mm-hmm.
So it's to each their own and just something to consider for how you want to do a league. If that's fine with everybody, rock with it. Who cares? But now looking at the team as we've teased so far, this is a complete teardown rebuild as we've discussed. So keep that in mind. We got Joe Burrow, we got Bryce Young, and we got Trey Lance at quarterback. At running back, we have an interesting room to say the least. We have Cam Akers, Antonio Gibson, Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller, Jerome Ford, Elijah Mitchell, and Sean Tucker. And then at wide receivers, we have the almighty Drake London, Jerry Jeudy, Brandon Ayuk, Jamison Williams, Kadarius Toney, Jaden Reed. Then at tight ends, we have Greg Dulcich and Tyler Higbee. Now, as we've discussed, we have a good bit of draft capital on this team, and this is where it gets pretty exciting and where you can see some silver lining to where this team is going, to say the least. So we have 324 firsts, and those are all projected top 6 picks, which is, if you could think about having 3 firsts in this draft class, you would have been pretty stinking happy with your draft. Then we have 2/3 and a 4th round pick. In 2025, we have 3 more 1st round picks, 2 2nd round picks, a 3rd and a 4th. And then 2026, we're back to all of our original picks. So I love that we've already done a really good job of building up a good amount of draft capital. And now it's just kind of about reallocating those assets as the time comes. But we'll get into that a little bit. So, Chev, we're going to talk about some players we want to build around, players we want to focus on in this rebuild, or assets we want to focus on in this rebuild to build around. What do you got for yours?
Yeah, I definitely have Joe Burrow on the list. That's a guy that you're going to want to keep probably for your whole existence in this league. I mean, he's a guy that you can count on. You can plug in and just play him every single week. And he's a guy that just has so much talent around him. And I threw in Bryce Young as well. I mean, you probably drafted him pretty early this year. I mean, he's got some good talent around him. I think they're going to do a great job of building around him too. That coaching staff seems to be pretty wise in what they're doing. I like what's going on in Carolina. I think Bryce Young is another guy that we can build around. Everybody else, I think there's a chance that we could trade them, honestly. So I didn't put them as any of my core players. But Bob, you do have some more assets that we're going with here. Who you got?
Yeah, so I do have Joe Burrow as well. I think that's plain and obvious. Young stud quarterback, no reason to move him. I can see the argument for Bryce Young. I didn't list him purely because if an offer comes knocking and it's a good one, I'm probably not going to pass up on it. I'm not as in on Bryce Young as everybody else is, or I'm just not the highest on him. But I don't think he's a bad player. I don't think he's a bad player to build around either. I think he's fine. So if you're in on Bryce Young, absolutely label him as a core player. Didn't include him in any trades either, so he's on this team in my long-term vision. So I also added the draft capital we have because that is a major catalyst to this rebuild. And I know it's kind of, in a rebuild, it's kind of obvious. We don't want to move this draft capital, though, especially when we believe that there are 3 projected top 6 picks.
Whew.
That is huge. In a super flex league, 3 firsts in the top 6 picks is just insane. Having 3 firsts in 2025 as well is already really nice. If we can even maybe start to look to add more of that, because they're never going to get cheaper. They're never going to be cheaper than they are today. They're going to continue to increase. Same with 24 firsts, honestly. Keep the draft capital around, and I think we're going to continue to look to build upon that. So with all of that in mind, we're looking at team needs, team trajectory. where are we headed with this team? This team was a teardown. I think we can definitely both agree this team is still rebuilding, and that is
Yeah.
okay. You have a plan in mind. He did leave in notes for us that with the 6 first-round picks in the next 2 drafts, he'd like the rebuild to be over by 25 to 26. I think he's pretty on par for that.
Yeah.
But Chev, I'd love to hear your thoughts on where this team is headed, where it's at now, and what it needs to kind of get from, where we're at to where we want to be, which is a competitive team and eventually that championship focus. So why don't you talk about what we need to do to get from here to there?
Yeah, and I definitely think he's on the right track. Obviously, we're still rebuilding, few years away. I really want to see him get some starting RBs. We have a bunch of dudes in the room, and Cam Akers could be something this year, maybe. Antonio Gibson, another guy that played second fiddle. Jamal Williams, Kendrick Miller, Jerome Ford, Elijah Mitchell, Sean Tucker, who, man, that'd be a great steal if he could just do something this upcoming year and you can get some draft capital back or just keep him on your team. But I want to see us get some more starting running backs. Obviously, in the rebuild, you don't really need running backs at the moment, but I want to start seeing that grow a little bit in that room. And there's a good chance, a lot of these guys might not be relevant. So we have Elijah Mitchell and Jamal Williams. Those are guys that maybe aren't going to help us in the future. So, maybe looking to trade them moving forward. And then I just want to see another QB possibly or two, depending on what happens with Lance. We're hoping that Lance on this team is going to be successful. Hopefully he finds a role, whether it's with San Francisco or with somebody else. That would be a huge beneficiary for you in this league. But, just adding maybe one more guy that you can count on in this upcoming year. I mean, with 3 first-round picks that are going to be top 6, I'm excited for what's going to happen with this team next year and how you're going to rebuild it. What are you
Yeah.
looking at for team needs and team trajectory this upcoming?
Yeah, so I 100% agree. Though the running back is an issue, and I think you touch on a great point. Like that's obviously a weak point,
Mhm.
and the thing is with it is like I don't see anybody outlasting this rebuild in terms of value, production wise, and being worth holding on to. I'd rather move these guys and do something with it, and then refocus on the running back later. So I think you touch
Yeah.
on a great point there. But overall, this team just needs some clarity. There's just a lot of questionable pieces that are just kind of mid for a
Mhm.
nice way of putting it, and guys that just I don't really see that are worth building around at this point. And that's my next point: core pieces. I want to have more players that I feel really confident in building around, and I just don't see a lot of that on this roster right now. Like I said, Bryce Young, I think is fine. If you're in on Bryce Young, like I said, I'm not trading him. I don't hate having him. Same
Mhm.
with Drake London. I think he's a good enough player where he's worth holding on to. But I do think there's also an argument to be made that we've made on this channel many times that there is some market worth moving him or looking to move him. And same goes for a guy like Jerry Jeudy. Brandon Ayuk is a guy I like a lot. Didn't move
Mhm.
him. Jamison Williams, another guy in that same discussion. So I just think that there's not a lot of pieces I'm dedicated to building around on this team. I'd like to find those players. I think we'll probably do that in the draft. We'll do some through trades, I think. I think a good part of the core is going to come through these draft picks that are so crucial.
Mhm.
And we'll get to that more and more as we get into this. But that's it for my team needs trajectory and all that fun stuff. Let's talk about some potential transactions, potential trades, trade pieces, all of that fun stuff. Chev, I'm kicking it to you first because you have the slap in the face to everybody watching this video as your first trade out the gate. So what do you got for us?
Oh man, it shouldn't be a slap in the face, honestly. I mean, we're making moves to get this team better, and maybe we're tearing down at the wide receiver, but I think we're gaining some good assets back. And this first trade, I'm trading Drake London for Jahan Dotson in a 24 first. Dotson's a guy that we saw last year thrive. I mean, when he was playing, he was doing very well. I still think, like I said, I like Drake London. I still think he's going to be a good player. The value to me is a little off, but he's still a solid player. But if you can trade Drake London for Dotson in the 24 first, you get another piece that you can build around in the draft. And you also get a good wide receiver in that trade. So I love that trade of what we can get. I would just say my next two are just in season trades where these are older players. They're not going to be with us when we're ready to compete. Jamal Williams, I think in season, if Alvin Kamara is out for suspension or if he's just not staying healthy, you could probably get a second for him if you're trading to a competing team. I like that trade a lot. He's not going to be somebody that we're going to be counting on. later on when we're ready to get this rebuild off our backs and start being a championship contender. And Tyler Higbee as well. You can get a second or third probably for him in season. I think he's actually going to have a really good season in that offense with Matthew Stafford. Bob, what about you? What trades are you looking to throw out there and make this rebuild maybe a little bit quicker?
And I think the thing too, to do real quick touch on the Drake London point, because I know we're going to get comments about it.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think with this trade is like, if anything, it's a nod to Drake London's value. We're not necessarily knocking Drake London. This isn't a cheap price to go pay to go get Drake London on your team, but it is somewhat close to the market value. And that means, hey, Drake London's getting his due here. I prefer Dotson over London pretty much in a value vacuum, but then you get the 24 first on top. Awesome deal. Love it. So I think just, take that for what it's worth, I guess. But moving on to my trades, I am moving a lot of trades. I am continuing this teardown. I'm taking it. We took all the drywall out and all this stuff like that out of the house, and now we're just, Stud's got to go too. We just got to get everything out of this house, basically redo everything, redo all the floor plan, and you get it. So my first deal, I'm looking to move your 3rd round pick plus Antonio Gibson for your 2nd round pick. So he did note that he does not have his 2nd round pick in this build. We have 3 firsts, 2 thirds, and a 4th. I'm assuming one of those thirds is yours, but I would go get your 2nd round pick, guarantee that full round upgrade. And that's something to think about when you have trades and when the draft picks get spread across teams and things like that. If you're dealing with teams that, you can look at their roster and you see that they have X team's 3rd or 2nd round pick and you have X team's 3rd round pick, and you can work a deal where you get the 3rd, 2nd flip, you are guaranteeing a full round upgrade. And I don't think people think about that enough or realize that is a, nice neutral strategy. And people just don't really think about that necessarily when they think, oh, it's a 3rd, 1st, 2nd round pick. You get a full round upgrade in that deal. So just something to think about. I would make that deal again. Another player that I just don't think outlasts this rebuild in terms of value. And then even if you get to a point where, the value sticks, the production is okay, how much longer do you really have Gibson for after you're out of this rebuild in 25 or 26? Not long. We know the shelf life on running backs isn't perfect. I think Antonio Gibson does yield himself to maybe having a longer shelf life since he is more of a receiving option. But either way, looking to move him, looking to get points off of this roster and improve my draft capital. Then I'm moving Trey Lance and Jameson Williams for another top 6 2024 first projected. So look around, see who was picking up there this year, see who was, justifiably picking up there this year. And maybe if there's somebody that was picking up there that didn't have their pick, if that makes sense. So they would finish with the 3rd pick, but they didn't make a pick at the 3rd slot. Maybe they traded that pick away in the future. They didn't get to better their team that much this offseason. Target that team. That's the number 1 team you should go look at because you're prospecting that pick is going to be that much later. Looking for more 24 capital. I can't get enough. I want it all. I'm moving Jerry Jeudy and Kadarius Toney for a 24 first and a 24 third. Another deal where, I don't hate Jerry Jeudy. I think he's another player who kind of falls into a mix of not the worst player to hold on to in a rebuild. But I do think there's value to be had for a team that's just looking to retool, looking to rebuild, get 2 more draft picks. And Kadarius Toney, I've never been in on the guy. I am fully out on him at this point. If you can't get those deals done, some modifications I have, I should say. Trey Lance, Cam Akers, and Kadarius Toney get a 24 first and a 24 second. If you're unable to get the first 2 deals done, basically mixed up the same 5 players and added Cam Akers into these deals as well. Then moving Jerry Jeudy and Jameson Williams for Jackson Smith and Jigba, which I think is actually shockingly closer than people might think. I know, and I've gotten a lot of hate in the comments for this, that I've been real low on Jameson Williams. And this justifies that I know people are high on Jameson Williams still. And so I'm throwing him on this deal, making him my shiny object, and Jerry Jeudy's upside and, what he's put on the field and what he did towards the end of last season. I'm going to get one of my favorite rookie wide receivers from this draft class, actually, and trying to make that deal work. If you're able to get some more capital, throw your bonus 3rd in on this deal to help mull it over, throw a 2nd. I'm fine with it. This deal right now is solid enough as is, but you might have to do a little more. Depending on where they took Jackson Smith and Jigba, you might have to do a little bit more. With all of these potential transactions in the book, we're going to get into somewhat of a wrap-up, closing thoughts, and things like that. But, one thing I wanted to touch on is what are we going to do, or suggest to do throughout the length of this rebuild to ensure that outcome we want, to get from where we are now through all the trades, through what we want to do with all these players that we want to move off of, how are we going to continue beyond all of this to make that final push next year, so on and so forth? Chev, what do you got for your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm just hanging on to my top 6 picks. I think that is the best case for you. Don't trade those things away. We're a little bit far out from competing. Let's keep those picks. Let's get some nice players in the 24 draft, and let's just continue to find ways to gain capital and throughout the season. Move some older successful players in the 2023 season, like I've talked about in the trade scenarios. Let's continue to find ways to get more draft capital. That way, we can move up with that. I know Bob's going to talk about that later, but having capital is huge because of what you can do with it. Everybody loves it. And, some will most likely not help you. We talked about that a lot, like Jamal Williams, Higbee. There's a few other guys on the list that they just will not help you. Let's get some capital before their value just is gone forever. Let's find ways to maximize the value of these players while we can. And let's just continue to build and move on to 2024, baby. It's going to be a lot of fun with those top 6 picks. I know there's a lot of good players that Bob wants to talk about too. So, Bob, what do you got going on for this rebuild? What is going to be successful outcome for these guys?
Yeah, so 100%. I agree with everything you just touched on. We want to make sure we keep the picks we already have. We don't want to get cute with those. I think in 2025, however, there is a discussion for if you're starting to turn that corner. If you have enough 24 picks, you can utilize the value inflation that happens to rookie picks in 2025 to trade for proven veterans that can kind of expedite you past this next rebuilding year to where you actually compete in 2025 versus 2026. I think that's something worth noting. Use the draft capital in 24 to get those studs, and like you said, increasing the draft capital we have for next year. I want to do that specifically because if for some reason we don't end up with pick 1, 2, 3 in next year's draft, I want to find a way to get to picks 1, 2, 3 with the 3 picks we have. Let's say we end up with 4, 5, 6. I want to find ways to align draft capital to where I can make the jump with each pick to where I need to go. And I think with taking a lot of the points off this roster, we are going to lock down 101. I think we're able to get Caleb Williams on this team and then probably our quarterback too, which is great. And then if we're able to get to 102 with hopefully one of those other picks, or we trade up, whatever the case is, snag Marvin Harrison, get an excellent wide receiver on this team to continue building around, and then just kind of go from there. We're doing the best we can to get from here to there. We need to make some strategic moves, but that is the best thing I think we can do for this rebuild. And what can help it take those next steps is to keep the capital you have, get more capital, find ways to improve that draft capital. That's an amazing trifecta for a rebuild, is finding ways to improve draft capital. Don't sweat the later picks either. If you need to throw in a 3rd or 4th to bump up things, if the league was deeper, I'd be more open to keeping those 3rds and 4ths. But if you can use those to get more deals done, I'm 1,000% in on it, because you're not going to keep these guys more often than not. Just looking at this roster right now, Kayshon Boutte, probably not going to last on this roster. No. I don't see it happening. There's already smoke that he's going to not make it through camp, which is insane. When you think about the fall from grace he's had, but guys like that, there's some other players too that with it is such a strange confine to be in, because in a start 10, you usually want to kind of strive towards depth and having more pieces. But since it is such a confined roster size, you do need to kind of have the focus of also really towing the line between having depth and having elite pieces. And the more you can get to just straight up elite pieces, the more you'll be able to turn this rebuild around quicker and build this team out to be that much better. Because with a small roster, you just can't have these pieces that aren't doing anything for you. You need to be very efficient with the roster pieces you have, unless you are in a rebuild. So that's just something to keep in mind. Once you start turning that curve, we need to have the most efficient roster possible. Right now, it's okay to have guys like, long shots like Sean Tucker, Elijah Mitchell, Jerome Ford kicking around. Paris Campbell, I would say, is in there. Tony is in there. There's probably an argument for Trey Lance to be kind of a long shot right now. There's been no positive news coming out of camp.
No.
And that's where I struggle with anybody who wants to, tout Trey Lance over Brock Purdy right now. No positive news for Trey Lance that I've seen. At least there might be some small blurbs out there, but I haven't seen one bit of positive news. So I think making out these moves to be keep the draft capital, like I said, get more, trade up, be efficient with your roster. In 2025, once you're looking to come out of this thing, that's where you look to entertain trade outs from the rookie first round picks. And hopefully those are early as well. and you can get really good players for the picks you have. And then hopefully you'll be on your way to a championship run from there. But it is going to be a long road, so it's going to require patience and not trying to get too greedy too early. I think that's going to be huge.
Yeah, and I think with the one taxi spot, like those third and fourth round picks, those are not going to last. Like you said, there's only one taxi spot. I am keeping one of those first round picks on there. There's no way I'm putting a third or fourth round on there. So that is why we're saying move up with those, because there's just not much spots available to keep it. And that's the problem at this point. So those third and fourths, always be trying to move those, in my opinion, to get into the second or just move up a second if you need to. Like, that's what I would be looking to do with any third or fourth round pick I ever had in this league, honestly.
Thirds and fourths have so little value here. If you do end up making a shift in either bench or taxi depth at some point, there's an argument to be made. But right now, and honestly, for me, in most leagues, my thirds and fourths, I'm in fifths if it's a fifth round draft. Those picks are purely for trade fodder. You know, anything you can do to just sweeten deal, like, oh man, you're close. Here's a third round pick. You're close. Here's a fourth round pick if it's a lower level deal. Like, it's not a big deal. Things like that. I just, with a league like this, until that changes, if it does, if it doesn't, cool, whatever the case is, you know, like I said, live your league the way you want. We're not going to league shame or anything like that. But keep in mind the value that those picks really hold. And while it's cool to have them and have all those assets, they should be used for trading up in drafts, helping mull deals over, things like that. Not for drafting a player with those picks is probably the worst thing you can honestly do, because I think your value on that pick goes from 15 to 0 real quick, you know, like miles per hour. And it wasn't that much to begin with. Chev, do you have anything else to add?
Hey, stay with the grind, brother. Get those top 6 picks. I mean, if you get 1-2 or 1-3, we're looking pretty solid this next upcoming year, man. I'm excited to see what this team can get built into. I think you're a year or two away. We're not super far off, so don't fret on that. Just keep grinding. Keep up the good work. You're doing some good stuff, brother. Keep it moving.
I think the thing with rebuilds, and you know, the one big mistake I see with rebuilds is teams just tearing everything down, and they don't have the proper value to show for it after. That they rebuild too hard, they rebuild too far, too fast, whatever the case is. This team still has the value on its roster to continue being, and probably more than I think it really should have, probably for how much, you know, pick values on the board, especially being those early picks. This team is in a good spot to really turn things on in 2025, 2026. We'll see how picks shake out and things like that. That'll be the big determination, is if those picks are top 6 and, you know, one is 101 and, you know, another is in the top 3. But either which way, Devon, appreciate the heck out of you for getting this audit and having us do this for you. Look at this team. Anybody else who wants to get the team audit, you can check the pinned comment or the YouTube description box below. We will set you up with the team audit there. But that is going to be it for us in this one today. We will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.